Hey, I just joined Chad and Mark on the LanternCast to talk about the DC Comics event 0 Hour Crisis in Time. It's an essential part of Hal Jordan's story, and it somehow came out 30 years ago, which is entirely too many years. Check out what we had to say about this event in episode 564 of the LanternCast, link in the description of this video. Alright, it's time to answer another batch of your questions. Remember that if you've got a question you'd like answered, you can leave it in the comments section down below and I'll get to it in a future video. Josiah Spetaleri asks, I'm currently reading Rebirth, New 52, and finishing Jeff Johns and the New Guardians. I want to know what takes place before the new 2024 series, and if it connects to any other issues such as Justice League. Overall, what do I need to know going into the 2024 Green Lantern? So currently we have a Green Lantern ongoing series written by Jeremy Adams, and a John Stewart series called Green Lantern War Journal written by Philip Kennedy Johnson that's ending with issue 12. The only thing that I'd consider to be required reading before starting either of these books is the previous Green Lantern series written by Geoffrey Thorne. It's 12 issues plus an annual and a 2-issue Future State miniseries. It's collected in 2 volumes titled Green Lantern Invictus and Green Lantern Horatius. This series created the status quo that serves as the basis for most of what Jeremy Adams and Philip Kennedy Johnson are currently doing. You could always skip the Thorne run and just go right into the current stuff, but then you're going to have a lot of big questions, like, where are the Guardians? Why is the Central Battery so weird now? What's all this about the United Planets? What happened to John Stewart's powers? The Geoffrey Thorne run was polarizing, and I agree that there are some things it did poorly, but I still enjoyed my time with it overall, and it really will help give context to the current books. You also don't have to worry too much about how any of this ties into other DC books. The Geoffrey Thorne run was happening at the same time as the whole Death of the Justice League thing leading into the Dark Crisis event, and while a lot of Green Lanterns do appear in that material, none of it is essential reading, and it really doesn't fit with the continuity of what was happening in the Green Lantern series at the time. And after Dark Crisis ended, there wasn't a Justice League anymore, so the Lanterns have been free to do their own thing in their own books ever since. Camille Cherzanowski asks, what is your opinion on the Silver Age powers? Maybe not the wacky ones like turning people into seagulls, but stuff like density shift, molecular structure change, astral projection, energy light absorption. Since Jeremy Adams in the new run brought the ability to make full-color constructs back, and expanded on that ability with Hal using his mask to see through different light spectrums, what do you think about bringing some of the other older powers back, and which would be the most fitting for the 21st century? You know, honestly, I don't think too many of the old powers should come back, if only because the rings are already ridiculously powerful without them. Think about it, the standard abilities of a lantern ring are flight, survival in virtually any environment, long-range communications, universal translator, it can stand in for every science fiction scanning device you can name, and the ability to create constructs of anything the user can imagine. That is so damn overpowered, and the only real limitation is the need to recharge. So I'm fine with more obscure powers staying in the past, unless a writer has a good idea for a story that needs it. But we don't need them just dropping in randomly, like the handful of times both Hal and Kyle just create holes in the sides of buildings. They don't break the buildings, they just make parts of the wall not be there, and it makes no sense at all, and I'm glad they don't do it anymore. Andromet says, let's delve into Lord Malvolio of the Green Flame. What are your thoughts on this character, the intriguing theory suggesting his involvement in Hal's transformation into Parallax prior to Geoff Johns' tenure, and if you believe there's untapped potential in him? The beauty of a character like Lord Malvolio is that he embodies limitless potential. We know he had a secret plan, and that it appeared to be working, but we never found out what that plan was, which means it could be literally anything, especially now that so much time has passed. I think the theory about his ring being responsible for what Hal did in Emerald Twilight made sense at the time, and whoever came up with that was really clever. But I kind of don't like it, because I think it's infinitely more interesting if Hal did those things without any outside force influencing his behavior. It's the same problem with the Parallax retcon. I love the idea of the emotional spectrum and the entities, but I hate how easy it is to write off Emerald Twilight as something that Parallax made Hal do, even though the reality of it is more nuanced than that. As for what could be done with Malvolio now, I actually think we should focus less on his ring and more on his backstory. We know he's very old, born on Earth in the 17th century. His father was an alien Green Lantern from Sector 1634, and his mother was human. He learned all sorts of stuff from his father before killing him and stealing his ring, and then immediately flying off into space to find his father's home sector. Already I have questions. What was a Green Lantern from Sector 1634 doing on Earth? What knowledge did he pass on to his son? Is that knowledge the reason Malvolio killed his father? Was there something special about Sector 1634? Was his mother actually human? I don't know the answer to any of these questions, but the point is that we should be asking them and thinking about them, instead of just focusing on how Malvolio's ring could've, would've, should've explained what Hal did in Emerald Twilight. Dead Sprite wants to know, what are your favorite aspects of each of the human Green Lanterns? I like how Hal turns tragedy into positivity. His backstory is similar to Batman's, and yet it turned him into a beacon of light, and he never lets the world hold him down. I like how Guy is fiercely loyal to his friends. Even when he's being the biggest jerk in the universe, he'll still give everything he has to protect the people he cares about. I like how John is kind of the perfect expression of this whole modern era of Green Lantern. A soldier and an architect, destruction and creation. With John, the ring is both the ultimate weapon and the ultimate toolbox. I like how Kyle always tries his best, even if he doesn't fully believe in himself. I like how determined Simon is to be a positive influence in his nephew's life. Family is important to Simon, and though a lot of his relationships with relatives are strained, this is one that really matters to him. I like how Jessica shows us that emotional growth isn't always linear. How there are good days and bad days, and even on the days when you lose that battle, real willpower comes from continuing to fight on anyway. I like how Jo realizes that the devil's in the details. She isn't naive enough to think that you can actually solve a big problem with one grand gesture. Lance asks, how would Hal Jordan and Anakin Skywalker each respond to the other's character-defining paradigm shift? How might the eventual conflict play out? I don't think Hal and Anakin would like each other at all. They're too similar. I think they'd look at each other and see the things they hate the most about themselves. I don't really know how you'd do a battle between Darth Vader and Parallax. That seems kinda lopsided to me, though I'd love to see what Vader would look like if the Parallax entity possessed him. Random Ramblings wants to know, what are your opinions on the constant return to the status quo in comics? I kinda wish that Hal and Barry stayed dead so that Kyle and Wally could permanently establish themselves as the Green Lantern and the Flash. I agree with you, and I'll take it one step further. By now, Kyle and Wally should have been permanently replaced with a new generation, and someday that generation should be replaced. DC and Marvel are both way too concerned with nostalgia. It should be an ingredient that's occasionally used in some stories, not a main pillar of their entire business. I very strongly believe that reading or rereading old stories should be the primary outlet for anyone who's nostalgic for the old days and wants to relive some aspect of them. We do not need brand new modern comic books featuring Hal Jordan and Barry Allen having classic adventures that remind us of the Silver Age. We can just go reread their Silver Age stories. I mean, what is continuity even for if we're just going to keep going in circles? As far as I'm concerned, the purpose of ongoing continuity should be to continuously advance things forward. Everything about these characters and the world they live in should always be slowly changing and transitioning into something new. DC is famous for its legacies, these expansive family dynasties that keep growing with the addition of more and more great characters, but it's the illusion of progression. New young characters are introduced in the 1990s and 2000s and 2010s to carry on these heroic legacies, but their predecessors are still around and still active. Characters from the 1960s, 1950s, and even the 1940s are still running around doing the hero thing. And I love the older characters as much as anybody, I really do. But at some point it has to be okay to let them live in back issues. It has to be okay that the old favorites don't get new stories anymore. It's not like their existing stories are going anywhere. Anybody who wants to read an awesome story about Hal Jordan, Barry Allen, Alan Scott, Jay Garrick has hundreds, if not thousands, to pick from. They're not new, but so what? Maybe the answer is period pieces. DC just finished a handful of miniseries starring JSA characters, and both Alan Scott and the Wesley Dodds Sandman got brand new stories that took place during the Golden Age. It's not the first time they've done something like this either. DC will occasionally publish a series or a miniseries or a one-shot that tells new stories about beloved characters set back during their glory days. Maybe they need to lean into that. Maybe there could be an ongoing Justice Society of America book that takes place in the 1940s and never leaves that decade. Meanwhile, there can be another JSA book set in the present day starring all of the younger legacy characters. And the same could happen with Green Lantern. Every now and then, there could be a miniseries that gives us new Kyle Rayner adventures set firmly in the 1990s, totally independent of whatever is happening in the ongoing Green Lantern book. Of course, none of this will happen, because big corporations don't like to take risks, and the bigger the company gets, the safer they want to play things. It was bad enough when Marvel and DC were just the two biggest comic book companies, but now these characters are all multi-billion-dollar multimedia brands that they don't want to mess with too much. The classics sell, so the classics will continue to be sold. And just to be crystal clear here, I'm not saying that I dislike any of these characters. If you've followed my content for any length of time, you know that I get a lot of enjoyment out of the characters we currently have and the way things are currently handled. But it still makes me kinda sad that there's so much creative potential in these characters and universes that will likely never be explored because it's the riskier option. Juan Bizanusura wants to know, what are your thoughts on how My Adventures with Superman is introducing the concept of Green Lantern? Every episode of this show is such a delight. It's an amazingly well done, well written, well acted TV show that has earned all of the good faith in the world from its audience. Seriously, if anyone hasn't watched it yet, you need to give it a try, especially if you're not already a Superman fan. I am constantly hearing about people who never really cared about Superman before, but then this show made them really like the character. There are so many nods and references to DC comic book lore and stories packed into this show, and yet none of it feels forced or intrusive. Some of it's subtle, some of it's in your face, some of it's Superman lore, some of it's building out a full DC universe. Like Jimmy's YouTube channel being called Flamebird, a reference to the superhero identity he adopted when he and Superman went to Kandor. Or this casual mention of Sub Diego, which was a major storyline in the Aquaman comics back in 2004. That kind of stuff is all over this show, and we see some pretty blatant examples of it when Superman is taken aboard an alien ship and forced to fight holograms of warriors who died at the hands of his captors. One is a Thanagarian, one is a Parademon, and one is a Green Lantern. I don't think this is based on any specific character from the comics, though if I'm wrong about that, please tell me in the comments. There isn't a lot to say about this Green Lantern character specifically, but I love the kind of world building this scene represents. This version of Superman is still new, still figuring things out, and has never ventured out into space before. So they used this as an opportunity to tease the kinds of things that could be waiting out there among the stars, and I think it was really effective. It was a great surprise, and it made the world of this show feel so much bigger. Will we see more Lanterns on this show? Hard to say, but even if we don't, even if this is all we ever get, honestly, that's fine, because the people making My Adventures with Superman have already proven that they know exactly what they're doing, and I'm just excited to go along for the ride. Black Phoenix asks, does the backup central power battery on Earth have the ability to restart the other Lantern cores? Probably not. The way it was described in issue 9 of Green Lantern is that the battery and pedestal were set up specifically to start a new Green Lantern Corps if the existing infrastructure failed. I'm sure the Guardians could build a similar setup for the other Lantern Corps if they wanted to, but they'd have to want to. They'd also have to be alive, which they aren't right now, but that tends to be a temporary setback, and the whole backup idea does potentially open the door for the other corps to find a path forward. York Lane asks, With the reveal of the Crimson Flame, do you think they're setting up to reveal that all lights in the emotional spectrum have a star heart equivalent? I don't think so. Or, I guess I should say, I don't believe that was the original intention. I see the introduction of the Golden Age Red Lantern as them using cosmic mythology as a way to facilitate a specific character-driven story, not as a way to set up a whole new subset of the emotional spectrum or something. But give it enough time, and I'm sure we'll have more versions running around, because that's just how comics tend to go. Common Sense wants to know, has anyone been released from the science cells for good behavior? I don't know about released, but there have been a handful of times when villains have worked with the Green Lanterns in exchange for their freedom, or just time off of their sentence. Before Blackest Night, there was a massive prison break on Oa, and both Kanjar-Ro and Bolfunga the Unrelenting agreed to help the Lanterns get the situation under control when Kyle promised to advocate for their early release. And during the Durlan War, a bunch of villains including Bolfunga, Kanjar-Ro, Hunger Dog, and Evil Star realized that having the Durlans in charge of everything is worse than having the Green Lantern Corps around, so they decided to team up with the Lanterns on the condition that they wouldn't be immediately arrested once the war was over. The Lanterns didn't like it, but they were shorthanded at the time. And finally, Tevya Smolka wants to know, what is your opinion of how the video game Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League handled the death of Jon Stewart? So I didn't play the game, but I did watch a video of the entire Green Lantern boss fight, and I'm very glad that I didn't play the game. The gameplay is way too much of the same tediously repetitive crap that takes way too long, and the only reward for completing it is a cutscene where I get to see a character I like get executed. I have been reading comics for most of my life, and at this point I have completely had my fill of the dark and gritty edgelord shit that everyone convinced themselves was so cool. It's not what I want from superhero fiction. I don't want dark and gritty deconstructions. I don't want ultra-violence and gore. And I especially have no tolerance left for any story that embraces or glorifies nihilism. The people who made Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League have made great games in the past, and I believe that they will make great games again. But this game misses the mark on seemingly every level, especially when it comes to understanding why people like any of these characters in the first place. And that'll do it for this batch. If you have a question you'd like answered, leave it in the comment section down below, and I will get to it in a future video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, so that you'll know when the next installment of this Q&A series comes out. Until then, thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan, we'll talk again soon.